You are listening to Parenting Our Future with certified parent coach Robin McMahon, author of The Yelling Cure and founder of Parenting for Connection. My podcast is all about providing you with the tools and solutions you need in your parenting so you can create the family you always wanted. For more information on my book and other resources, check out yellingcurebook.com. Hello, everyone. It's Robin McMahon here. Welcome back to my show, Parenting Our Future. Today, I have a super cool guest. You're going to love her. Her name is Wendy Gossett, and she is a super cool mom. I just want to say that to start out with, and you'll see and understand why shortly. Trust me. So Wendy is here. She's a best-selling author. She's a speaker and a parenting specialist who helps parents understand their children by using temperament, psychology, and neuroscience. I love that. She has over 20 years experience in education, working in the classroom, and also in the corporate sector. But here's the thing, Wendy, with all of her educational experience, it didn't help when parenting her daughter because they were opposites. She struggled to connect with her daughter. And since the user manual, as she says, for parenting her daughter didn't exist, she set out to create one. I love it. So because she has struggled as a helicopter parent, an explosive parent, and also an embarrassing parent, she wants to help other parents who struggle just a little bit less. So Wendy, thank you for being here. I love all that you're doing in support of parents and also with your own family. Welcome.
Thank you. And I could say the same thing about you.
Oh, thank you so much.
Collaboration.
Yeah. That's right. Yeah, it's all good stuff. I love this here that your daughter has been, like, I consider my kids my greatest gift. They, I tell my son, my oldest son, who is my biggest challenge, also my greatest gift. He makes me want to be a better person. He makes me want to be a better parent. And so tell me a little bit about what was the deal with your daughter and you, and what happened there?
Well, I was not as amazing as you were back in the day. I had to come to that realization through much tears and frustration. So
me too.
I'm hoping to bring other parents to that point a little quicker through understanding. So my daughter was, my son will go back. My son was super easy. And I think there's some adage out there about, your first child's going to be easy and then just wait for your second child. And
I always think you get one of each, honestly.
Yeah.
Whether first or second, you get one of each.
Yeah. Or else you'd just be walking around with, thinking you were all that. So, and that's kind of how I was. I was thinking I have this parenting thing, all figured out. And then my daughter came along. So my son was kind of like Bob Ross. He was this rule follower, mellow kid. And then my daughter was like the Black Widow. She's really tough, independent. She'd, take the heads off of her dolls and write on them with Sharpies, and had pet rats and ran them through like an obstacle course. She was like their general and they were her little, sergeants. And
wow.
Yeah. And so, and I tried to relate to her by what came naturally to me, which was I'm a feeler. I'm an extroverted feeler. And I talk about my feelings, and she wanted nothing to do with that. She is very, very prickly. She's very, very independent. She's very logical, very analytical. But I didn't realize any of those things about her, except for the prickly part. And so I framed all of her strengths as weaknesses because I didn't understand them. So,
well, I was going to just say, how did that make you feel when she was so different than you, when she was doing, like, what did you feel?
It was really unpleasant because if I were to be honest, I didn't like her. I loved her, but I didn't like her because I didn't know how to relate to her. And I think, if I was being really honest, I'd say I kind of wanted a little mini me, maybe somebody
100%,
really easy to understand. And, but then just like you said, once I realized how our brains were wired, I realized that we are literally opposites of each other. And really our brain configurations are like a lot of husbands and wives, and that whole Jerry Maguire effect where we complete each other. That's actually how my daughter and I, how we're wired, is we can actually complete each other. My greatest strengths are her weaknesses. So
Right.
she's very uncomfortable with feelings and expressing her feelings, and she has social anxiety, and I'm not very logical, and
Right.
and she's extremely logical, and
Right.
so
And we have video proof of how illogical you are. I'm just going to tease that, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But here's what I want to say about what you're saying is that you're saying that her differences from you, and let's be honest, we all expect a little mini me in one way or another, right? We expect to be able to relate to our kids, and that they're going to be just like us. Well,
Right.
here's the thing is that forget that thought, because that's not the way it is. But as parents, we project a lot of expectations. We project our dreams, our,
Yes.
all of this onto our kids, and then they will, and especially a daughter like yours, they will reject it. Like, absolutely not. Do not fit me into your box, mom. I don't want to be there. And then you are now faced with a choice. I see it as a choice, whether you are going to dishonor her all of her life and tell her all the way she's wrong, how she doesn't, she's not good enough. And maybe you don't say it like that. You just, through your actions, through your experiences, she sees that she's a disappointment. But you, being the kind of mom that you are saying, no, like, how do I take the way she is and the way I am and create connection together?
And what you're talking about, by the way, psychologists call de-identification. It's an actual thing, differentiation, where kids want to be different and make their own way. And so when you can learn about their temperament, and it goes very deep and detailed into how their brain actually functions, what are their main functions and what are their more struggling functions, and so that you can have realistic expectations for your child. And since my daughter was an introvert, it meant that her strengths were hidden from view. And when kids are younger, all you can see sometimes are the weaknesses, because they're underdeveloped. These strengths are underdeveloped. And so when you can learn their temperament at an early age, you can know what you need to grow and what you need to look for in them. And so I learned that she was this tactile, analytical girl. And so I was able to direct her out of drama, which she was in theater with her friends, and she actually couldn't figure out why she wasn't that good at it. And I directed her into engineering and physics when she got a little bit older, because I knew her strengths.
Yeah. And here's one thing, though, as I'm listening to you, that I just want to jump in and say, it's so important for parents to realize that when your kids are different from you and they're resisting you, or they're just so different, it's not about you. So this is about you looking at your child for who they are, for the gifts that they have that may or may not be like yours. But I think this is where the work is too, for us parents, is to look at our child in all of the beauty that they are, whether you can identify with it and relate to it or not, and then say, look, they're like this, but that isn't against me. They're not trying to manipulate me, upset me. It's like, I just gotta not bring my baggage as a parent into this relationship, because it's not about me, right? And it's just about my child. And how do I learn who my child is so that I can honor them? And that's what you help people to do, right? And so what I want to do is, and you've started to talk about this a little bit, but I want to just back up for a second and just talk about what is temperament. So we're talking about your daughter's temperament that was so different than yours. Yes. And then what like, just tell me in an easy way to understand, what is temperament?
So the easiest way to understand it is The Wizard of Oz. And some of our kids haven't even seen that movie, but it's a great classic movie. And it came along right around Carl Jung Frank Baum wrote The Wizard of Oz in the 1920s, right when Carl Jung came up with the psychological functions of the brain. And each one of the Wizard of Oz characters has a motivation. So Dorothy's motivation was to go home. And the motivation of Dorothy's temperament is safety, security, and following the rules. And that's about half of society is that type. And most parents had at least one parent that was that type that parented them. And so we tend to have those expectations that we're going to have a child that follows the rules, that is in the box, that, does all those things according to plan.
Right. We all want Dorothy's.
Yes, we do. And schools, a lot of schools are designed for Dorothy's.
For Dorothy. And yep.
and then you have, and by the way, my first child was a Dorothy. That's funny.
Yes.
He was the boy, but he was Dorothy. And then you have the lion. And you can imagine the lion is opposite of Dorothy. The lion just was all about courage. And if you think about a lion, they're free. They roam free. They don't want to be in a cage. And so that lion type is the opposite of Dorothy. They want to be out hunting and gathering and not following the rules.
Okay.
And
blazing their own trail.
Right. They fear being controlled. And so as a little baby, you can even tell when they're little, you can tell if you have this child who's pretty easy to understand and, tends to listen to you. Or if you have this lion that is just doing their own thing and super independent and doesn't want to listen to you. They're challenging. And then you have, speaking of challenging, the scarecrow. And the scarecrow was all about his brain. And he wasn't even on the planet, right? He was up on that post. And because the scarecrow is intuitive and he's more about his thoughts and ideas than he is what's in the physical world. And he's all about being autonomous and smart and proud. And so he's a challenger too, because he thinks he knows more than you, mom and dad. He's, he's very, very smart and wants to lead his own ship or be the captain of his own ship. And then you have the Tin Man, who was all about his heart. And so that type is, I feel like you and I, because we're both very, very relational and we're all about, helping people and, deepening relationships. And that Tin Man was also intuitive. So not in the physical world as much, but more about feelings and relationships and extremely sensitive. Remember, he was rusting up all the time. And so in a nutshell, those are the four temperaments. But of course, people are super complicated.
Yes.
So underneath
complex. Yes.
Yes. So underneath each one of those temperaments, you have four specific types. And so you can have introverted Dorothy's, extroverted Dorothy's. You can have feeling Dorothy's. You can have prickly Dorothy's who are really controlling. You can have bossy Dorothy's and you can have passive Dorothy's. So you have subtypes for each one.
Can you have a lion that's crossed with the scarecrow?
Oh, yes.
So you can, yeah. Because I was thinking when you were talking, I was thinking, I definitely have
That's my daughter, by the way.
Oh, that's my son.
My daughter. So my daughter's a lion and lions eat humans. Right?
Yes.
I'm a Tin Man, she's a lion, yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking my son is a cross between the scarecrow and the lion for sure.
Yes,
but also has some Tin Man in him too. Is this big, beautiful heart and is full of love and light. But then it's the other stuff that shows up. So here's what I know about temperament, and I am open for you to challenge me if you think if I have it wrong. But really, and this is what I tell parents too, is temperament is who your child is versus their behavior, right? So if your child is more of a lion or the scarecrow or whatever it is, that if you don't like that, and I think it really relates to what we've kind of already established here with your daughter, and if you don't accept who they are, that is that is who they are. You cannot change that part of them. That is who they are. And so for you to try to change that, all you're doing is sending the message that they are not good enough. They're not lovable or valuable in this world, right? So many more things. And I think and that's where a lot of problems with self-esteem come in. And the way that you label your child, and if you're labeling your child based on their temperament, which you can't change anyway, then that becomes the record that plays in their head throughout their life, right? Like, oh, yeah, she's always so bossy, or oh, she's such a chatterbox, or he's a bad egg, he just always needs so much attention, or whatever. He's so difficult, right? When if we can actually flip it and say, okay, like, let's reframe the way we see our kids and look at those positive traits, and that's what you're doing. Is that right?
Yes. For instance, argumentative. The strength of that, studies have proven that argumentative kids are extremely intelligent. They're usually, a lot of times, that's scarecrow type. And the strength of argumentative is problem solving and negotiation. And so if you can start calling that argumentative child your family problem solver, then that's a whole different way to frame it. And then I also want to touch on something. So it's not just focusing on the strengths. It's also to motivate your child and to have that mutual respect. It's also being willing to admit that your way is not the only way, and to point out your limitations, because we all have them. And when you were talking about how your son has all these facets, really you're talking about the 4 brain functions that each one of us has. And so, but we use them in different order. We use some more than others. And so we all have one brain function that causes us stress, that is our most underdeveloped function, that comes out when we're stressed. And if we know what that is as parents, we can talk about our limitations to our kids. And if it's the case of my daughter and I can actually go to her when I have a problem that's in my most inferior area and say, hey, you're really strong in this area. I'm weak. Can you help me out? And so it's that mutual respect and actually admitting that you don't have all the answers. And when you're willing to share your limitations with your kids, they're going to be a lot more willing to admit their limitations and be motivated to do or to work on those areas.
Yeah, I really like that. And I think that some parents may think, well, I don't want my kid to know where I am not good in, because I want to look like I'm good at everything. But I think that really humanizes you as a parent. And also, like, how cool is it that your parent, this all-knowing, all-seeing parent, sometimes says, hey, you know what? You're good at something. Help me out. Like, what do you think? Like, how amazing is that when you can elicit your child's ideas and thoughts and feelings and say, hey, you taught me something today. I learned something from you.
Right.
That, I mean, your child will be burst with pride.
Right.
That they help mom or dad.
That's how you motivate them.
Yeah.
By truly seeing them and knowing them. And, and both of you admitting that, we all have weak areas. And, and I think to put on that lens of looking at other people, knowing they have weak areas too, because in this world of followers and, the highlight reel, kids can tend to look at other people and think, oh, they have it all together. I'm the only one that has these faults. And when you let your child know that now there are these temperaments out there and every single one of them has weaknesses, has limitations. And, would you trade yours for someone else's?
Mhm.
And a lot of times you wouldn't,
Mhm.
if you found out what other people's limitations were or the things that they struggle with.
That's
And
right.
so giving kids this lens of perspective to understand that everyone has their unique strengths. You
Mhm.
can't have the strengths of every temperament and type,
Right.
just like you wouldn't want to have the weaknesses of every temperament and
And
type.
the message is beyond that, I think, is that just because you have a weakness doesn't mean you're a failure in that area. It just is a less exercised muscle or a less,
Right.
honed in skill. And so this is not something you beat yourself up about. You just recognize it, and you recognize that that's also a shared human condition, that therefore we all have weaknesses. And I think that's so important to know. And I think it's important for moms and dads to know too, that like the mom who who brings cookies to the classroom where I go to the store and buy cookies, like that just isn't where I excel. So like that doesn't make me less of a mom, or
Right.
less of a human even, because she can do it and I can't. That's okay. I do a lot of other really important stuff. So I'm
And
fine to not bake those cookies for the class. Don't you think?
oh, and it's important to know that it's not a fixed mindset that we're talking about
Ah, I
here.
love it.
It is a growth mindset. You can grow that inferior function. So, for instance, my daughter's most inferior function was extroverted feeling, which is my number one. So she had social anxiety. She, felt awkward around people. She's an introvert. And so she's not going to just own that for the rest of her life. She realizes she needs to work on it. She can grow,
Mm.
and she's grown by leaps and bounds in that area. But, I said it before, what you don't know, you can't grow. And so when you know that about your child early on, you can, start getting them fun apps to play that teaches them about that inferior function. You can
Mm.
you can encourage them when they're not stressed out. It's never in the heat of the moment that you talk to them about their weakness. You
Mhm.
encourage them when everything's great and they're confident to,
Mm.
step out of their comfort zone a little bit and build that
Mm.
inferior function.
So it really is important that you look at your child without judgment, that you look at your child really in a neutral space, and just, without attaching anything to it, any judgment to it, any criticism to it. It's like, okay, this is just the way she is. This is just, my daughter just is not a feeler, but we know that emotional intelligence is important in this world. So what can I do to help her understand the language of feelings and needs, and to make her way in the world, because that is important. So that's what you're saying.
Yes, and uncertainty breeds fear. And
Yeah,
so
does
when
it
my
ever?
daughter was certain of what her brain functions were, it helped her
Mm.
not be as afraid and not be so just wondering about, am I broken, why
Mm.
am I not like other girls, why at my birthday party I'm the lion, so I want to be the center of attention, but why are these other kids, it's more natural to them. And when she realized that she was an introvert and that she's not a feeler and that she's very different from how a typical girl is wired, she was able to be more confident and to own who she was and to have a better sense of identity and confidence, because she realized that she was created a certain way for a reason and it wasn't just by accident. And she's not the only one on the planet that's wired that way.
You are currently listening to the Parenting Our Future podcast. I'm parent coach Robin McMahon. And if you're enjoying this podcast, please share it with someone who you think might also need to hear this. Please don't forget to subscribe, and I would be grateful if you gave me a 5-star rating on iTunes. And if you're a parent who's struggling and you feel like you might need some support to be the confident leader of your family, where you can calmly respond to any kind of behavior, disrespect, or your kids not listening to you, well, I have a membership group that you might be interested in. All you have to do is go to kamomsclub.com for more information. That's kamomsclub.com for more information. Now, back to the show. So what I hear you saying is you're talking about these different brain functions as well. So we've got temperament, and then we've got within the temperament, we can break each of those 4 areas down, those 4 types of temperament, from Dorothy to the Scarecrow and so on. And then beyond that, you can break each of those down into 16 different types. But those are created by brain function. And what I understand, and what I just want to clarify for everybody listening, so we all have a really good understanding of it, is there are also 4 main brain functions, right? Your number 1, your number 2, 3, and 4. And so 4 would be the least developed, and your number 1 function is where, like, your go-to. Is that right?
Yes. And also we were talking about weaknesses and strengths. I actually like to call them imbalances, because strengths can actually be where our imbalances or weaknesses come from. So, just like we talked about with the argumentative, and
right.
So I like to call them imbalances, and we can get those into balance. And as people grow and become adults, you can see very well balanced adults that are very good using all their functions. And then you can see adults that are struggling with that. And so, but to your point, the brain is divided into thinking and intuition. That's the front area of the brain. And then feeling and sensing, the back area of the brain. And the 16 types are created by those brain functions coming in different order, different preference. So we were talking about the lion, and you said, can you have a combination of the lion and the scarecrow? You can, because my daughter, her number 1 brain function is thinking. And the scarecrow is all about his brain. So my daughter is a thinking lion. You can also have a feeling lion. And so that is where those different subtypes come from, are from the different brain functions.
Okay. Now, how early can you start to see children's temperaments?
Very, very early on. So what I kind of talked about earlier, where that lion is a challenger, and you just know your baby is a challenger. The scarecrow is a challenger, whereas the Tin Man and Dorothy are more cooperators, and they just want to get along with you. They want to obey. Now, you do have hybrids of both of those too, because if you have a Dorothy that is a thinking Dorothy, she can be very my way or the highway, like I said before, and so can seem a little bit more like a challenger. But the key there is, how are they in school? If they're doing really well in school and are super sweet for the teacher, and they come home and they're like, then you've got a thinking Dorothy on your hands. So
I see. Yeah.
But for the most part, you can tell with babies, they're a traditional cooperator, you understand them, or they're a challenger.
Yeah, I'll say that my oldest was a challenger right from the start. But for me, not knowing about temperament back then, I was just super frustrated and annoyed with him, because, like, could you please stop crying? And, could you just, like, I mean, it was hell on earth at the beginning, right? He just nothing. And embarrassingly so, I couldn't calm him down. I couldn't, I even had an epidural, and he went up instead of down.
Oh,
probably too much information, but talk about a challenger, right? But of course, being the kind of person I am at that time, I took it all to mean, I couldn't do it. I couldn't connect with him. I also blamed him too, as his little baby self. Was frustrated, but, like, it's just so freeing and so exciting to know that, like, we can look at this in a totally different way. I love it.
I had a parent tell me that it just helped her to relax, because she had been feeling as if her child's behavior was a reflection of her. And she was pushing against that child's temperament. And when she realized she could just go with the flow of their temperament and let them be who they were, and she was just their guide, it really helped her to be able to relax and have confidence in her parenting. Because going back to that scenario, you have that child that's crying all the time, and you know, you might not be sure if that child is just strong and wants to run the show, or that child needs really strong boundaries from you because they're fear-based. And so it just helps you to know, because I see that a lot of times where I have a really soft, introverted feeling mother who has this child who needs really strong boundaries and is pushing against her with everything he has because he knows he can get away with it. He's like that gambler in Vegas that every now and then he gets the payoff of getting to do what he wants, you know, if he cries long enough. And so he's just going to keep pushing and pushing. And so then that mom has permission to be tough with that child because she knows she's not going to break him.
Yeah. You know, one of the things that I would love all the parents listening to do is to notice the words that you use to describe your child. You know, good, bad, indifferent. Just notice the words that you use to describe your child. And if you do say things like, he's pushy, he's relentless, she's whiny, or she's such a scaredy cat, notice those words and then think about those characters that you've talked about and say, okay, like, she just needs reassurance and comfort. That's just the part of her. That's just who she is. And not, you know, again, not criticize them or shame them, and look at ways that you can reframe them. And we're going to give people some tools here soon, as well, as we, you know, to really help you to get to this place. But I really want, you know, I want parents to take a look at the words you use to label your kids. And it is really powerful when you change the way you see your kid, because you see a different child.
Well, and there are some temperaments that all of society is against them. I hate to say that, but it's true. Society tells you to have resilience and grit. Society tells you to be an achiever. Yep. Society tells you to be an extrovert and to network yourself. And there's some kids that are none of those things. Society tells you to follow the rules, to be on time. There's some kids that are just in unicorn land. And they are here to bring beauty and art and creativity, and they're the artists of the world. And a lot of times you see these types just very, very tormented because they don't know from an early age that they were meant to be this way, and that there's nothing wrong with them, you know. And there's the Harvard happiness study. They followed people over 80 years. 50% of a person's happiness is determined by their temperament. And so these kids that are born with a very sensitive temperament already have something, you know, going against them. But thank goodness, 40% of happiness is based on how we respond to that temperament. So the parent—
based on your mindset.
Right. The parent who knows how to teach this child to be in the moment, to be with what is certain and true and not speculative, because some types are actually in the future. They are actually worried and anxious about the future. Some types are in the past. They're worried and anxious about the mistakes they made and they can't let them go. And the lion types are in the moment, and they're the most resilient, kind of optimistic types. And so it's also good for parents to understand that about their child.
I think that's really, really important. I love that you just said that. And as parents, we've got to check ourselves. You know, are we freaked out because the societal norm is that we are going to want achievers, and if my child isn't an achiever, then they equal a loser? Or if my child is late all the time, doesn't thrive in school, do we now catapult ourselves into the future and they're a drug addict, they're in jail, they're, you know, all of the worst possible things that we could think of. Whereas if you follow what you're saying, which I love, is that, look, these children have a purpose in this world, and maybe they're the minority, but they still bring art to us. They bring
Right.
different things that make this life worth living. But everybody has a place here, and I really love that. That's really
Well, and I
beautiful.
love what you said about, there are, half the world are Dorothys. So we love to plan and we like
Mhm.
to want to know what's going to come next. And with temperament, you can actually get a pretty good idea what's going to come next, because each one of those brain functions develops at different stages in the child's life.
Mhm.
So the third brain function, we call it the tertiary function, develops when the child is around 10, 11, 12 years old. And so if they're an extreme, prickly, black and white, rigid kind of kid, you can look forward to in the teen years or the tween years, feeling is going to start developing.
Mhm.
And then as an adult, that baby function, the infant most inferior function, starts developing more as well. So they're going to
Mhm.
get more balance to their temperament in the teen years. And
Wow.
for some of the Dorothy rule followers, you start seeing them in the teen years go get a tattoo or go out and do something crazy. And
Right.
parents are like, what is happening? And that's when their inferior brain function is starting to come out, which is exploring. And
Right.
so they feel safe now to start exploring a little bit. And
Hmm.
so it's a way to just really forecast into their future as well.
Wow, that's very cool. Okay, so let me ask you this. How do things like, we're talking about brains, how do things like ADHD or being on the spectrum, how does things like that affect the temperament? Because wouldn't that do that?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So you have an introverted thinker who is also intuitive. So
Mhm.
that makes that child socially um, socially awkward because he's in his head, and he's in his head with all those brilliant thoughts that are out of the box thoughts. So this child can often be called Asperger's or autistic, or and I'm not saying that that's not the case, but sometimes it's just this very unusual temperament that's like 0.1% of the population, and the parent does not know who this child is. They think they're an alien. Like I had a mom, an adoptive mom, who had one of the most rare temperaments herself. So her lens was very narrow. Her biological son also had a rare temperament. So she had this really skewed perspective of what normal was. So her adopted child would run their finger along a dirty car and then lick it. And she thought something was really wrong with this child. But this child was acting perfectly normal for a sensory seeker. And so
Right.
sensory seekers often have ADHD,
Yeah.
so introverted sensors often have sensory processing, or they have anxiety or OCD because that introverted sensor is so sensitive to sounds and
Hmm.
taste. So they can have misophonia, or they can have some of these, OCD
Hmm.
conditions because of that. Textures and, of food and clothes and sounds and those sort
Hmm.
of things.
So
Really
they go
negative.
hand in hand. They
Yes.
can go hand in hand. Wow,
Mhm.
that's really
And
fascinating.
they've actually, done images of brains. My daughter and I actually did it.
Hmm.
But the brain of the extroverted intuitive
Hmm.
looks like a Christmas tree
Hmm.
when it's solving a problem. And it's the only brain like that. It's the fastest moving brain because they bring all their faculties to problem solving because they're so creative. And this child doesn't pick a lane. This is the kid that you've got this Dorothy parent who's like, come on, pick one sport and get good at it. And this kid's like, no, I want to do this sport this season and this creative thing this season. And I want to do this next and this next. And they want to do it all.
Hmm.
And that's how their brain is wired.
Hmm.
And so you can really learn a lot from how your child brain how your child's brain functions.
And just stepping out of judgment and just noticing, like, okay, it just really seems like my kid just wants to do it all. So if they do, I can allow that, right? It's not.
It's hard though, because, you know, you don't want to be the permissive parent. You know, you want to be able to have guidelines. And so that's why knowing their temperament and knowing they're wired like this, you're able to say to siblings, for instance, well, this is how your brother is wired. And so we don't have the same expectations for him that we do for you. And, you know, because one child needs to have really serious boundaries and rules. And the other child is more exploratory and needs more freedom. And so this is how the family, the mom and dad, can tell their kids, we honor each other. We all have to honor each other.
It's really great. I really love that. I really, really love that. That is a really great piece of advice. So let me just ask, where do people get started then? Because this all sounds so good, right? I can't wait to do this for me and for everybody I know. But where do people get started? Because you have resources. So
yes, I do. And I just want to emphasize that this is not for families in crisis. It can be, but it's also for families who just want to have a deeper connection and for everyone to just really understand each other better. So it starts with my online assessment. Parents take it for their children because this assessment is trying to get at the true picture of who someone is, not their learned behaviors. And so when a child takes it for themselves, they might want to be an extrovert. And so they're going to skew their answers, or they might not have a full awareness of who they are and who they've always been. If it's a girl, she might, you know, and she's a thinker, she's not going to want to answer those questions about being, you know, more rational and not as kind and warm. And because society tells her she needs to be kind and warm. And so parents have a more realistic view of who their child is. And so that's why I encourage parents to take my online assessment for their child. And child temperament manifests itself very differently than adult temperament, because the adult scarecrow is calm and rational. The child scarecrow is explosive, and they might cry for an hour straight because they want their way and they are rigid in their thinking. And so they look completely different. And a child lion can look completely out of the box and scattered and like a tornado hit their room. But the adult lion has learned, they're very practical, and they've learned to be efficient and practical. They have to put everything in the same place. And so they start looking more like Dorothy. And so I've seen so many of these patterns. And in my book, I actually have over 200 case studies of child temperament that are very relatable, that parents can find their child in. And so I've used all these experiences and patterns to create this online child assessment. And so that's really where it all starts.
Yeah, well, what I liked what you just said, though, is also I think it gives parents a little bit of hope. So your explosive child now, who's explosive now, look, don't freak out and worry that he's gonna, you know, be this way forever. That he'll grow out of this and actually might be the calm in the storm for everybody else. So that is some good hope.
He'll be a CEO that's, you know, paying your bills.
Right. Hey, maybe that sounds great. So we're gonna put a link to that in the show notes here, so you have access to that. We'll also share what your book is all about, where people can get it, because I think it's a really cool thing to have in your back pocket. And I like what you said too. This is a proactive thing to do. This is not when the bottom has fallen out of your family. This is like proactively going to go in search of this kind, you know, of this information for my family, so that I understand them more. I'm wondering what kind of what personality would purposely in the middle of a blizzard on an interstate embarrass their children? Who would do that?
Oh, well,
Wendy?
I'm definitely not a rule follower. I mean, I am to some extent, but I don't ever think people are watching me. I'm just that kind of personality because I'm not watching other people. I'm just in my own world. I'm an intuitive Tin Man type.
Yeah.
But the Dorothys of the world were just cringing because they're like, oh my gosh, my son. He was like so embarrassed.
So Wendy, for all of you that don't know, and we're going to put the link to this video of her being a total goofball in the best possible way. So she had a video that went viral of her dancing in the middle of the interstate when her kids are mortified. But like, this wasn't just it went viral, but was talked about by some pretty important people like the Backstreet Boys, Hoda Kotb from the Today Show, Princess Kate. I mean, come on, I like to see Princess Kate doing this with her kids too when you're stuck and you can't do anything. But I mean, what a
outside
cool,
the Rolls Royce.
That's right. What a cool slash a horrifying mom moment. Yeah. I feel like I would do that too. Maybe. Yeah. Maybe. My kids might disown me. But
well, as always, you and I are both the consummate teachers. So, it was going to be the worst day ever. We were stuck in traffic for 4.5 hours. Ugh. And, negative memories stick more than positive memories.
They sure do.
Negative experiences stick more. So I thought if I could stick a positive memory to this negative one, my kids will remember this forever.
And now there's no way to deny it.
It's probably going to be the number one memory we've ever had as a family. And if I hadn't done that, it would have just gone down as just the crappiest, most awful day and probably would have been forgotten or maybe just remembered in a really negative light.
Thank you for listening to this edition of my podcast, Parenting Our Future. I'm parent coach Robin McMahon, and if you're enjoying this podcast, please share it with someone who you think might also need to hear this message. And don't forget to subscribe, and if you like my work, I would be grateful if you gave me a 5-star rating. For those of you who like my content and want more, visit me at yellingcurebook.com to get your copy of my book and to find other resources to help you. Until next time, I am wishing you and your family peace and connection.